It's good because when I was thinking about this presentation, I kind of didn't know how to present these slides because I like starting with pictures, which has nothing to do with the conference. And actually, yesterday, conference was about self-care. was a good one because I usually take my backpack, my tent, and another camera, and I usually go in a wild place. So this was me a few weeks ago when I was going to the Peak District region of England. And so I was enjoying the wild, unloading my brain, and at the same time thinking about the conference and how it would go. And that's some landscapes and an introduction to me. So I'm Thomas, obviously French, as you can hear it, but I live in England. I call myself nowadays a software designer. It's just a placeholder because when people ask you what you are doing, I never know how to answer. Again, so because I do full stack engineering, Node.js, web technologies, UX, I do user research at the moment, work on open source projects, I do trainings, I used to organize conferences, so I have no idea really, but I just do stuff. We created a small co-op company last year. We are just the three of us, but we are span over 3 time zones, so it's pretty nice. And we wanted to use web technologies for greater good. That's why we include user research in what we do to make meaningful code to happen. And at the moment, we work with the French government on their open data platform. We work on budget transparency, and we help teams to feel and fit better together as well. So the title of the conference is, the talk is Writing a Book in 2017. Yesterday, we already had a talk about how naming things is hard. So I thought about naming it Writing a Technical Book in 2017, or how a developer writing a book printed on paper in an open source way. I wasn't sure either if it was worth it, so I said, let's keep the title and let's say, actually, it's more a journey about a web developer and a book publisher. 3 years ago, you had a conference, a talk actually in Budapest about someone who explained his process of writing a book. There is a link below. It was a very interesting one. It's not about the same thing. It's more about how I manage my relationship with the publisher as a developer. So I'll start. This is going to be going through various parts, a bit of context, present you where it starts from, the writer experience, something about like community engagement, modular tooling, and the publisher itself. So a bit of context. It starts in 2013, actually. And I sent like a random email to a publisher I knew saying, hey, do you want a book like that Node.js? And he said, yeah, sure, send me a open document, open office document in 6 months. And I'll do my job at that time. I said, okay. So he sent me afterwards like, okay, this is what your book is going to look like. And we usually tend to think that, yeah, books are that, but there is the entire process before, and that's the bit of the incarnative things. So what does it mean to write a book? When, from a writer perspective, we often see it as, well, I'm writing that, but actually you're writing that. That's your daily interactions. It's a single file. You open it with open documents, OpenOffice or LibreOffice. And inside, you have stylings. They provide you templates. You can say, this is the headline. This is like a small admonition block, and so you write according to their styles. But when you start to have interaction with them, when they start to edit the same file, the diff of like removing lines, adding new ones, start to be a bit messy. It's not very comfortable. And from a previous experience with that same publisher, that also translating, oh, here are the 5 chapters that I've edited, take the 5 of them and manually include them in your master copy. So you're like, wow, manual work. You know how copy and paste is efficient. Usually you lose work when you do that. So that's part of the relation with the editor, with the publisher. It's not necessarily that the best, and then you start like to have, well, I'd like you to fix that, and that, and that, and that, and so you have no way to know what has been done instead, unless if you check everything. So that's also like the writer experience that you have usually with a publisher. And so I was like, okay, I want to send you like an open document file, but maybe I'd rather do it the developer way because I'm a developer, and the way you present me, how I should work with you is not the one I want. And he said, well, yeah, fine. I'm fine with everything you do as long as you send me an open document file in 6 months. Well, OK. So I have like entire freedom. So that's where we start with the developer experience, the writer experience. So I wanted something to be playful. When you write a book, it can be like we saw yesterday. It can be a reference. It can be how-to. It can be guides. I didn't want it to be a boring reference about Node.js. I wanted something a bit more, yeah, a bit more playful. I love the learning by doing concept, so I wanted people to eventually play with examples that I would give to them. But likewise, for me, I wanted to be sure that my examples were working at the same time. I wanted it to be friendly. I had no assumptions on the audience. It could be developers, it could be people from another programming language, it could be people just interested in learning how it works. It could be documentarians, it could be product owners, it could be whoever, no problem. You can read it. I have no assumption on that. And I also wanted it to be open in a developer way, as you can read it without DRMs, you can read it without technical gates between you and the content. So, and I also wanted an easy system to, well, have like get reviews from people instead of emails, because obviously emails was not very nice. So, what does it mean then to say to write text as code or code as text, or both at the same time? Because if you're writing a programming book, you're writing text and code. Well, the first thing I want is like my book. When people get a copy or something, just clone the book. Like, do something with it. Send me diffs, whatever. But even that on my machine, I don't want to rely on a single file which contains everything. I want the history of everything. So, and if you break the open document file, that's the kind of stuff I wanted it to look like. I want to have like folders per chapter. I want to identify very easily the assets, the pictures, because maybe sometimes I want to reuse them somewhere else. Maybe sometimes I don't have like LibreOffice on my machine and I want to edit it directly online. So that's the view you would get out of a file system directly. Like, this is how it's organized, and you don't have to be a genius to understand how eventually to find out the organization of that. What's the nice thing with when you start and play with Git is when you're on GitHub, especially when you scroll the screen up, then you have a bar, and that bar says, well, you have actually X commits, few branches, few releases, and so this is the mark points of the timely points of the work in progress. You can track like the first commit from the first day, and you can see the various branches which say, well, these are the various experiments I'm making at the moment. It's unsure, but that's not the kind of stuff I want to be considered as publishable at the moment. And then the releases are, that's the stuff I sent to the publisher, and it just saw the open document file, as you know. And then we have the last bit when you're on GitHub, which is the collaboration bit. Because you have, okay, that's the first tab, which is about like the code, but then you have the rest, which is issues. It's like you can think, oh yeah, I should write about something, or maybe I should migrate to Node.js version, whatever. And then pull requests, because reviews are actually pull requests. You could say, please change that word, and so you have something to track and have a conversation bit by bit. I tried the project system also, but it didn't work that well. And so from there, so I have like my layouts, I have my files, I have everything I want. It's like, so what do I write with? And initially, I started that with a tool I like, which is IA Writer, because I tried with Markdown. But very soon, I kind of realized that Markdown is nice, but when you have to write a book, when you have to have like very specific descriptive blocks, when you say this is a title, but that actually is the prefix of the title, but it's included in the title. This is a code block, but actually the code block you want to highlight it in a specific language. And when sometimes you want to include files, it's like, well, Markdown, I'm not good at that. So I switched to AsciiDoc. But AsciiDoc then in IA Writer doesn't render super nicely. So it works, it's very clean, but it's very black and you can't see much. So I switched to Atom, which is an open source code editor, and it has an AsciiDoc plugin. So I had like rendering, color, syntax color, and that was also a nice way, because instead of switching between Atom, or I used WebStorm back in the days, instead of switching between two softwares, I could actually write code and text at the same place, because I had everything, my folders and everything, at the same place. So that was pretty nice. It felt like good experience. You have menus, so you can say, well, actually, I'd like to do that. And what's nice is you also can have the rendering directly on the right-hand side. And this is pretty much what I wanted to get. It's like, well, that's barely what is going to happen to appear in the book. So I can have very concise stuff, which is stored as text. And the rendering is part of a separate process, whereas when you're in an open office, you have everything at the same time. One of the things I like to do as in the open source world is to develop in the open, but then it's writing in the open, which is a bit contradictory with how publishers work. They are more, send me stuff in 6 months and we'll fix everything at once in 6 months. So they're always super busy because they can't manage the workload like very easily. Whereas in that case, I write stuff, I push them, and what is finished is what is pushed. So the benefit of that is some people actually started to start the project and to make a few comments saying, well, actually, what you wrote there is not exactly precise as it could be. They started pushing a few contributions saying, well, there is an extra word, just remove it. They didn't know ASCII-Doc, but because it was fairly simple enough to read, because it was accessible without having a specific software, well, they could just make the edits from the web interface. Sometimes some of them were kind of zealous enough, and they were even like writing additional paragraphs. And that leads at the end to a broader question about that. So it was pretty nice because it was just by doing it, people started to go over it and started actually to learn about the project, which was nice because I was already doing the marketing for the publisher. And that leads to the community engagement. So usually the writing experience is kind of, it's like more of a cowboy experience. You're alone in the field and you have the cattle to care about, and that's pretty much it. Like you're writing in front of your screen and you're alone to do that. The fact of doing it in the open, doing it on GitHub, doing it with like, as an open source project, was nice because I could then interact with people. But first, I tried many approaches to write the book. I tried to do that like on my nights and weekends, which leads to a very good burnouts. Then I moved to a part-time job, and I said, well, I could use my spare time to do that, but I valued my spare time so much that in the end I was not willing to work on my spare time on the book. So it was like, what do I do? So because I quit my previous job, I took some time off and said, well, I'm just going to travel because I like traveling, and I'm going to see friends. I'm going to write in trains because it's cool. I'm going to learn from people who knows more than me, which means probably everybody else. And then at some point, I wrote a blog post explaining, okay, this is the method I want to use. This is how I'm going to travel. Here is a spreadsheet. You can add it yourself if I pass in your city, or you can just like ping me if you want to host me. And that's actually a kind of stuff which happened. People said, hey, I'm here, we don't know each other, but I've followed your work. And so I've discovered new places, actually places about social innovation as well. So I've connected with other communities in different towns. And at the end, each people who hosted me on a very volunteer basis, some of them I didn't know them, actually. And I always send them like a postcard to say thanks for hosting me and making that happen. I'm very grateful because I had nothing to offer. I didn't have like I was just living on my savings, so they were pretty happy. On the fly, also what happens by doing that, also by communicating in the open about yesterday I wrote this chapter. Actually not the chapter, but just a paragraph. It's more people say, oh yeah, actually I'm running a meetup. If you want, we can organize like a special meetup for you, and we could try a review of your book. And I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do, but yes, let's do it. It was pretty fun because some of them were like fully booked, and they were they were just interested in, oh cool, I'm going to be able to learn about Node.js with some people who apparently know stuff about it. That's what they think of me. But it was nice because each meetup has their own, actually, each group, each towns, they have their own specific stuff, they have their own specific focus, they have their own history, and some of them were more interested in how to deploy Node.js projects, some of them were more interested in how do I do front-end development because there is React, blah, 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 blah. And so it was very nice to kind of get their mind about what you understand about launching a web server. You come from the PHP world, but you use Apache, but so you have no idea actually how HTTP works, and so it was a good way to know where I could insert content to actually make that learning easier and less abstract. I also doing that was a nice way for me to do energy management. We don't necessarily talk much about it, but writing is actually quite strenuous, and so you had to recover, and I need to be alone to recover. I'm part of these people, but I also recover, but in a different way, with people I feel at ease with. And sometimes one of the nice perks is you have conversation about JavaScript stuff at breakfast, and some of them are like, oh, cool, that's all the problem for me. Another section of writing a book nowadays is actually when you use tooling, you have to write code. But when you have to write code, you have snippets like that, which are like plain simple examples. But one of the benefit of separating the code from the text is if you're a developer and have a tooling to check lint, syntax error and stuff, you can apply that to your plain file, to your plain files. If you're a JavaScript, you can use ESLint to see if there are errors, and so it prevents also it enforces the quality of the code you write. But because this is separate from the content, you have to include it, and that's one of the lovely stuff with AsciiDoc. You can just say, well, include that file, and you can even include that file from line X to line Y. And it renders super nicely in the end because you can have, well, that's a comment here, and you can see there's here you have actually a small dot, and you can document it, you can write it, and so you can, if you have like specific comments to make about specific lines, you can write that and manage that out, and so that's pretty neat. So you get code quality for free. If you make like a mistake, it's like, well, actually that is not defined, so you're writing shit. So it's pretty handy if you don't have, if you don't want to run all your files to make sure that they are working actually in the user's environment. The problem I encountered with that was the GitHub view wasn't enough because GitHub doesn't actually render them. So you would have like a nice experience. I would have a nice experience writing it, but people, if they would read the content as rendered as on GitHub, would miss part of it. They wouldn't see like the examples, so it would be harder for them to then find the code block example, see what it does, and so it was kind of boring. So I said, well, because I'm a developer, let's build a tool. Let's build a book. And at that moment, the publisher says, well, what's going on with the ODT? And as a good developer, you say, well, I'm working on something else. I'm building an HTML version of it. And that's what, oh shit, I missed it. But that's how it is rendered when you build AsciiDoc in HTML. What I saw on my editor was exactly what they were getting. But because it's boring to do that manually, well, you have to automate it. So I started working on automating the build of the book itself. So I used Travis CI. You could use something else, but each time I was pushing content, it was rebuilding the HTML version, and I had nothing to do. And it was simply defined. You could, yeah, like in 5 lines of code, you have something, but for the same price, I was like, well, actually, I could also publish the book on NPM, which is the Node.js package manager. And so you can install the book on NPM for free because I do that. So it's like, oh, cool, super nice. So I was building more and more around the book, about the experience of it as I was writing it, and less writing it, but it was fine. Also, sometimes I was thinking, I want to explain something, but it's particularly complicated, so let's just use a video actually to show how sync works across two devices and why this module could be useful. And again, when it's included in the project, it's like fairly simple. But when you're thinking about it, it's like, aren't you doing the book for paper? So how does the video play on paper? And so it doesn't. And one of the nice stuff also with AsciiDoc, you can say, well, if you're building for a particular target, you can include or not include that content. And so you can say, well, actually, for the paper version of it, they will have either a still image or nothing. So you can start to build meaningful experiences based on the target you have, instead of just doing like publishers do, which is ebook equals paper, but on digital. And the nice perk was it was built with AsciiDoc.js, which is the JavaScript port of the Ruby version. So it was a book about Node.js built in Node.js and distributed with Node.js. And the nice perk of that is it has been contributed by one of the maintainers of AsciiDoc.js, because I met him actually in Lyon in France, because that's where he lives. And so that was one of the super nice things. He understood better what I was trying to achieve with the book. And also, one of the interesting bits is I even designed a new feature for AsciiDoc. ASCII Doctor, because these plain examples, they are nice in the browser, but if you think about it, it's like, if you want to play with it, it's a bit boring, so I created a small thing which connects it to RunKit, so you can run the examples in the browser directly just by writing the examples on your machine. So it's live, you can find it on NPM, and that's all the kind of cool stuff you can do. You can make your own tooling bit by bit based on your needs. And the publisher itself, so they are good at publishing, and publishing, what it means, it's like finding authors, receiving like open document files, sending that to the printer, shipping to stores, and managing the payroll and taxes. And as you can see, writing doesn't appear inside. But some editors within the publishers, so the people who are looking after your content and checking the mistakes, they can be good at that. The first one I had was super nice. She was correcting my typos all along. But what was nice with that, doing it along the way, was I was learning from my mistakes as I was writing. Whereas in the previous experience I had, I learned about them 6 months, like I learned about them at the end, and I was done with it, so I wasn't remembering them. Whereas now I could learn, and we could exchange about it. And I've learned how to write the term platform in French after 30 years, so that's pretty cool. I kind of liked it. So they are good at books. They are good at pushing that on Amazon, whereas they are not good at making you finishing the content of the book. But they are way less good at dealing with the content itself and at thinking about what's a book actually, what should be in a book, or what should be a book nowadays. Should it be online? Should it have like better, nicer experience, or should they be published also on the programming package modules systems? So they're not thinking about it. It's just printing on paper, shipping in trucks, and that's it. Not with Docker. And so as someone said yesterday, well, they sucks, basically. But really? So let's wrap up the stuff. It sucks only because there is no dialogue. It would be very easy to say it sucks because they are bad or they are brainless. But it sucks because we are not talking about it together. It sucks because they are always in the hamster wheel. And so they are not thinking about alternatives, and because the authors, when they had to write something, they just say, okay, I'm going to comply. And so things don't move this way. O'Reilly did like great stuff with Atlas, but it's a closed source platform. It does basically what I do, except they have done that like for 20 years. And me, I'm just like crafting something and understanding the process of it at the same time. And finally, what is nice is by doing that, I found some kind of book ideal. The paper provide like some kind of experience, but you can get a different experience online. You can get interactive, you can get videos, and even if you install it with NPM, you can get everything because you have all the modules, all the dependencies. You can play with it, you can modify the examples, you can hack it, you can learn by doing, basically. What I really liked is because I already had like a modular approach, I started building on top of the content and adding layers of stuff I wanted to do. So I wasn't driven by the tool I was using. I was driving the tools. I was more in an emerging situation. And it's easier to cut off stuff because you remove things you added. And in the end, the question you will ask would be, so what's for non-developer writers? Because not everybody wants to write in Atom. And at the moment, the only thing you could have is you have to write ASCII docs. You have to know everything about the syntax, which can be a bit more of a learning curve than Markdown. And it renders as HTML, whereas probably that's the other way around you would like to have. You would like to write with a rich text interface and probably get the ASCII doc to put it in Git. So if someone wants to do that, it would be super nice. In the end, you also have the licensing, which is fuzzy, because when you are writing a book and you have a one-to-one relationship with the publisher, it's very easy to manage the royalties and the rights. But when you start to have people contributing paragraphs, do you want to send them like 1 penny or something like that to say, hey, thanks for the thanks for the contribution, based on how many books have been sold? So it's a bit, here it's not necessarily adapted. And in the end, also, I guess the biggest conclusion is I did that because I wanted my writing experience to be fun. I wanted to make it as a creative activity rather than just being behind my desk and just typing and say, oh, it's boring, and doing that for a while and never finishing the book. So the book is not finished, but I had a lot of fun. Thank you.